Who doesn't love donuts? Exactly. That's why today, we're gonna make them. Let's get into it. So obviously the dough will be the main component of the donuts, so that's where we're gonna start. We're making classic yeasted donuts here, so start by adding 1 cup or 240 milliliters of whole milk to a bowl or measuring cup, preferably warm milk at about 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 27 to 32 degrees Celsius. Then stir in 5 grams of instant yeast along with 10 grams of sugar to give the yeast something to feed on to help get some activity going. Now as we let that sit for a few minutes, we're going to combine the dry ingredients in a separate bowl. I'm using the bowl of a stand mixer here because that's what I'm going to use to knead the dough, but as always you can knead by hand if you prefer. This recipe will make 16 donuts, which is a pretty large batch, so feel free to cut it down if you want. But for this I'm adding 425 grams of all-purpose flour, along with another 70 grams of granulated sugar and 6 grams of salt. Then I'm just going to mix everything together using my dough whisk. Now after about 10 to 15 minutes, you should see at least a bit of foam forming on the surface of your milk, indicating that your yeast is healthy and active. So at this point it's time to proceed with adding the wet ingredients to your bowl, so add the milk and yeast mixture along with 3 egg yolks and stir to bring everything together. You could stir with a spoon or your hands or anything really, but I like to use this dough whisk. And a nice little trick when you're working with a sticky dough like this is just to wet your hands slightly before handling it, and that way it won't stick as much. Once everything is incorporated though, it's time to knead, so get out your stand mixer fitted with the dough hook attachment and knead on a medium to low speed for about 10 minutes. The dough will be very sticky at first, but over time it should come together to form a nice smooth ball. You may need to scrape down the sides of the bowl once or twice to make sure everything gets incorporated. It will still be somewhat tacky at the end, but that's fine for now because it'll get less sticky as it rises. So just transfer it to a lightly oiled container to allow it to rise for about an hour until just doubled in size. I like to use a clear rectangular container like this so I can see exactly when it's doubled. It's not crucial, but I also like to fold the edges over like so, rotating 90 degrees after each turn to develop a bit more tension in the dough. Then just finish it off with a little more oil on top to prevent it from sticking to the sides of the container and allow it to rise until just doubled in size. Like I said, this should take about an hour in a warm environment, but you can even let it rise in a colder environment like the fridge if you want it to rise slower. Doing it that way will also create some more flavor as the dough has more time to develop, so it's not a bad idea to let it rise at a low temp if you have enough time on your hands. It'll probably take closer to 3 or 4 hours that way. Now while you're waiting for that to rise, it's the perfect time to take a break, maybe make some coffee, and hit the like button on this video and subscribe if you haven't yet. Anyways, after about an hour at room temperature, the dough has just barely doubled in size, which is exactly what I'm looking for. So you'll just want to very lightly flour your work surface and carefully dump the dough out. For now, you'll want to leave the top of the dough unfloured, so you basically got one floured side, which is the bottom of the dough, and one unfloured side, which is the top. This will be useful for helping us to shape the dough, and you'll see why in a minute. Now, a lot of people when they make donuts like to roll this whole sheet out flat and punch the donuts out with a cookie cutter, but if you do it that way, you'll end up with a lot of extra dough that you need to then roll back into a ball, flatten out, and punch again, and it just messes with the whole structure of the donuts. So instead, I like to just start by dividing my dough into 16 pieces and rolling each piece into a ball. This way, I don't have any leftover dough, and you can even weigh them out if you really want to make sure that they're all the same size. Anyways, once that's done, each piece should have a floured side and a sticky side, so to form them into balls, just roll them around on the surface like this with the sticky side down, and they should form nice little taut balls. As you form them, just transfer them to a floured baking tray, and I like to line it with some parchment paper to further ensure that they don't stick. From this point forward, we don't need the dough to be tacky anymore, so feel free to use plenty of flour. So next we need to roll each ball out to a thickness of about 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick, which is about 1 centimeter. Just try to make them as circular as possible, which shouldn't be too hard if you've shaped the dough balls properly. Then place them back onto a floured baking tray, and if you want classic whole donuts, just take out a mini donut cutter or any small ring like this that you can find and punch a small hole in the middle of each one. Make sure to save the holes too because you can still fry them up to make donut holes. Now just cover the donuts with a floured dish towel or a bit of plastic wrap to allow them to rise one final time. This time we want them to get nice and airy, so it'll take anywhere from about 1 to 1.5 hours at room temperature, and once they look like this, they're ready. But before we get there, let's just make a couple of quick toppings. Today I'm going to make 3 types of donuts: glazed, cinnamon sugar, and frosted with sprinkles. And they're all pretty straightforward to make. For the cinnamon sugar topping, just combine 1/4 cup or 48 grams of sugar with 1 tablespoon of cinnamon and stir to combine. Next, for the glaze, just combine 240 grams or 2 cups of confectioner's sugar with 90 milliliters or 3/8 cup of milk and 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and whisk thoroughly to combine. You can also adjust the amount of milk or confectioner's sugar to get the consistency that you like. Finally, we're going to make a maple frosting, so just combine 240 grams or 2 cups of confectioner's sugar, 60 milliliters or 1/4 cup of milk, 60 milliliters or 1/4 cup of maple syrup, 2 tablespoons of softened butter, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Since this one's a bit thicker, you'll probably need to use an electric hand mixer to stir it. Again, you can add more milk or sugar as necessary to adjust the consistency. You want it to be thick, but still runny enough to spread onto the donuts. Now when your donuts are almost done rising, you'll also want to start heating up your oil for frying, so just add some neutral oil to a heavy pot to about 2 to 3 inches deep. I like to use peanut oil for frying, but you could use canola oil or vegetable oil too. The key to a perfectly fried donut is temperature control, so it's crucial to have a deep fry thermometer here, and you want your oil to stay between 325 and 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which in Celsius is between 160 and 175 degrees. So just let the oil slowly come up to temp over a medium to low heat as the donuts finish rising. Then once they're nice and fluffy and your oil is heated, it's finally time to start frying. So just carefully drop the donuts in one at a time, being careful not to crowd the pot, and fry them for about 1 to 2 minutes on each side until they turn a light golden brown color. To really get that signature donut flavor, be careful not to fry them too dark. Just a light golden brown like this is perfect. Then remove them onto a wire rack to cool, and repeat in as many batches as necessary. And don't forget about the donut holes. You can fry them up in the same way and just give them a little boop to flip them and make sure they get evenly browned. I'm sure you get the idea by now, so I'm just gonna wait to fry the rest of the donuts until later, and we'll move on with applying the toppings. For the cinnamon sugar donuts, I like to just dump a bit of the cinnamon sugar mixture out onto a plate, then brush the glaze onto the donuts and roll them on the plate, sprinkling them with some extra cinnamon sugar as necessary. For the glazed donuts, just go ahead and dunk them straight into the glaze, and that's it. They'll seem sticky at first, but as they cool, the glaze should harden and look more like what you're used to seeing on a typical glazed donut. Finally, for the frosted donuts, just stir up your maple frosting to make sure it's thin enough to coat the donuts, then dunk one side of each donut into the frosting and immediately sprinkle it with some sprinkles. Obviously, you can use whatever toppings you like, but for today, I wanted to demonstrate some of the classics. It's not too often you get to have fresh, homemade donuts, and to be honest, they're pretty hard to beat, so I definitely recommend that you give it a try. Now that you know how to make donuts, if you want to make some bagels too, be sure to click the video on the bottom of the screen. So there you go. If you like this video, I'd appreciate if you'd hit the like button as it really helps me out. I'll see you all in the next one.